Welcome, everyone. My name's Nancy Morrow Howell, and with Natalie Galusha, who's here in the meeting. We're from the Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging, and welcome to our first Issues in Aging seminar for the new year, and Happy New Year to us all. We're going to turn to our topic on elder justice by our expert, Janice Thomas, but I'm going to give you a couple of announcements first before we do that. First of all, we're excited that in April, our annual Friedman Lecture will be on climate change in an aging world. So we're going to focus on the intersection of population aging and climate change. We have an expert coming in, Carl Pillemer. So save the date, April 5th, and it'll be on the Danforth campus, and you'll be hearing more about that as we get closer. Also, in conjunction with that event, I hope you know that we give awards. We have two major awards, the Friedman Award for Excellence in Service and the Coppola Award for Geriatric Psychiatry and Neurology. Nominations are open. We're going to take nominations through March 1st before we select our award winners to be announced at the Friedman Lecture. So please consider nominating your colleagues, yourself, people. So many people deserve this. Also, in conjunction with the Friedman Lecture, we do an award for graduate students doing research in aging. We select the winner through a 3MT competition where the grad students get 3 minutes to share their big ideas with one slide. So please apply, get your students to apply. We'll be taking applications through February 20th and having the 3MT competition early in March. The details of that time and place are yet to be announced. And then next month, our second Issues in Aging seminar will be with Dr. Peggy Smith from our own School of Law. And she will be focusing on caregiving regulations and policies, and that is February 12th. Again, virtual. Okie dokie. So with that, I get to introduce Janice Thomas. Janice got her undergrad and her grad degrees at St. Louis University. She's an expert on organizational operations, specifically strategic planning and financial and operational efficiency for social service organizations. Her interests include diversity in the workplace and organizational leadership development. She comes to us today in her role as Elder Justice Manager at VOYCE. And many of you know that VOYCE is our premier advocacy agency in this region for people using long-term care services. Janice is going to be teaching us today about elder justice, what it is and why it's important. So with that, Janice, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I am going to indeed talk to you about elder justice, but I am going to, first of all, say, I don't consider myself an expert, okay? This is a new and emerging perspective on the treatment of older adults and adults with disability. And I am learning from folks who knew far, far, far more than I do. And what I hope to do is to be somewhat of a conduit of the things that I am learning and have learned and am applying in support of older adults and adults with disabilities in Missouri. So with that, what I'm really going to frame my comments around is the Elder Justice Coalition for Missouri, which is the Coalition for Justice for Elder and Disabled Adults, or CGJEDA. Next slide. I've already been introduced. I'm Janice Thomas, and I am the coordinator of that particular coalition. Next slide. The Coalition for Justice for Elder and Disabled Adults is one of 8 state and territorial coalitions funded to promote elder justice. And so next slide. so what is elder justice? You know, we're formed to promote something. What is it that we're promoting? Elder justice is a way, a structure, a set of practice and policies and laws that allow older adults and adults with disability to engage in their community and society free from abuse, neglect, exploitation, and able to live in a way that is self-determined. I always liken it to when sometimes in some communities, if people do something good or they do something in a way that is particularly uplifting, they said, oh, they did right by them. They did them justice. That portrait did them justice. That explanation did them justice. It did right by them. It was uplifting. It was an appropriate way to address that person or that thing. The reason that I like to make that distinction is because justice is often thought of in a legalistic frame, as if justice is somehow only available if someone has been, things have adjudicated in such a way. And so it has that legalistic frame. In the frame for elder justice, it is not legalistic. It is truly person-centered, and it encompasses all of the things that that person would need in order to live the life that they want to live. Next slide. So the target of our elder justice work is really around elder abuse, awareness, prevention, and support for those who have been impacted. These are only a few words, but it encompasses a lot of things. The support may be simply information. It may be access to housing. It may be informational. It may be societal support. So though it seems like this should be, oh my gosh, you know, prevention of elder abuse, that should be all. But it is also awareness. Many times, and I will tell you in some of our experiences to date, there are people who have been abused who are over the age of 60, and those are generally the folks that we're talking about, who don't recognize that they're being abused because the circumstances that they are living in, the community that they are living in, this is normal behavior. My favorite kind of lowbrow example is if Johnny's normal thing to do is to come to his older aunt's house every month and take $100 out of her purse. Every month, take $100 out of her purse. Doesn't ask if that's okay, but takes $100 out of her purse. Some would say, well, that's just what that family does. But if as a result of taking the $100 out of her purse, she's unable to buy her medicine, or is unable to, that's her grocery money. Or come on, she likes to play bingo and it's her bingo money. And that's what it takes to have her live the life that she wants to live. We could say we could capture that as being abusive, especially if it is done without her permission and to her detriment. So what we seek to do is to bring about some awareness of just what elder abuse is and how people are impacted. Next slide. So our goal is no physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, stalking, financial exploitation, or trafficking. A lot of words there, but let me pause for a second and focus on some of those. People will agree, physical abuse, mental abuse, absolutely, emotional abuse. but sometimes people don't know those things when they see them. One of the things that I learned when I got engaged in this work is I did not realize that stalking was a thing that impacted older adults and adults with disabilities. As a matter of fact, I went to a session with the National Center, which I will talk to you about a little bit later. And they asked, did we have stalking on our radar? To which I replied, no. Stalking is what we know of in the broader community as people being followed or people's premises being entered, or any of those things, those notes that let the person know that they are being surveilled and make them feel unsafe. But did you realize that that happens to older adults? And it is particularly problematic with older adults because they are often gaslit because, again, the awareness isn't there. Someone calls the police and says, oh my gosh, this person is following me. They have left notes at my house. And it is often thought of, oh, they're just glad to get the attention. That doesn't exist. It's not a thing. But it is a thing. And it is a thing just like in the rest of the community for all of the same reasons. But it takes on a particular, thank you for that. It takes on a particular role with older adults and adults with disabilities because they don't always have the wherewithal to do some things that others who are stalked would do. For example, they may not be able to leave their home as readily as others, or to move out of a community to get away from their stalker. And thank you for the person who put the information in the chat. So part of the work that we want to do is to bring that awareness. Just you can answer however. Were you aware that stalking was actually an issue for older adults and adults with disabilities? I was not. The other one that I will highlight is trafficking. Trafficking. We tend to think of young women and children, and we tend to think of sex trafficking. Were you aware that older adults, and this is primarily older adults, are also trafficked? They are trafficked as workers, as domestics, all the same features of anyone else that is trafficked. But this is targeted to older adults, much less adults with disabilities, some of that, but older adults are also trafficked. I was not aware. So this is a place where obviously people are not receiving justice. And because there isn't that awareness, it is also not being addressed. So next slide. So our coalition's mission is to be the convener of groups seeking to prevent abuse and support justice for older adults and adults with disabilities in Missouri. So our coalition is a statewide coalition, and we are making particular efforts to be inclusive of all parts of the state. I'm having conversations with people in rural Missouri as well as the urban pockets and all points in between. Next slide. So what the coalition will do is will provide professional education, facilitate training and networking opportunities, increase public awareness, increase legislator awareness and information about elder and disabled adult justice. Let me stop here because there are lots of organizations around the state that provide professional education and even provide professional education about abuse. There are lots of organizations that facilitate trainings and networking opportunities. But what we have found, and seems to be true and is borne out by much of the resources, those efforts are fragmented. For example, earlier this morning, I was on a call with another project that I'm involved with that seeks to reframe the system that supports adults who have been victims of abuse and older adults. And one of the things that we find is that things are very siloed. People do their thing, and they may do it great, but nobody knows that they're doing it. Or other organizations that may have some impact on the same population don't know that they're doing it. So as a result, I was nosing around, and I had an opportunity to talk with a woman in Kansas City who is doing a resource portal that is locally run and gives resources for that location. And it's web-based, and so it is actively managed and all of these things. And I was like fascinated to hear about this. And she told me that, oh my gosh, yes, our goal is to have this up and running in all parts of the state by 2025. Sounds like a long time, but it's next year. I am one of the participants in the Master Plan on Aging, which is the state initiative to create a master plan for all aspects of or manner of things that impact older adults. And one of the things that we continually talked about is access to resources. But yet the initiative that this group is working on never came up in the conversation. So the opportunity to network and to learn what is going on across the state so that we can amplify our efforts and be efficient is truly, truly, truly borne out as we continue to do the work. Next slide. So how did we come to be? A group of organizations working together, and actually many of us were working together on some of these other initiatives, responded to a call from the National Center for State and Territorial Elder Justice Coalition to build a broad-based multidisciplinary coalition to work on specific areas of elder justice for their state. They were very interested, next slide, please. They were very interested in funding something in Missouri because we didn't have anything and hadn't really been active in this area. And so we put together a coalition, if you will, and we wrote the grant. I, with some others, we wrote this grant and we were able to be funded. What you see here is some of the groups or the partners who are part of this effort. And the reason I say to date is that this list is always growing. I am constantly talking to people and telling them about what we're doing and how working with us will amplify their work, or it's just a good thing to do, or something that may be in keeping with their organizations or their personal mission. So as of right now, these are the folks or the individuals and the groups that are working with us. I have VOYCE with a star because VOYCE is a member of this coalition, but it is also the administrative agent. So this is not a program of VOYCES. VOYCE is a member of the coalition, but they do act as the administrative agent. Some of the folks who are on here represent much larger coalitions. For example, the MOPS, which is the Missouri Prosecutorial Operations Services, they have a coalition of some 100 people. Many of the people in that coalition have also joined us in working in our efforts. So next slide. Some little details. The group of organizations and individuals, we secured the grant, which is $328,000. It just began in October, and it will run through September of 2025 with an opportunity for additional funding. Next slide. So our funder and their support is really important because the National Institute of Justice, through their Office of Programs, yada, yada, they put together a contract with Lifespan of Rochester as the administrator of grantees. And so we call those the National Center. Forgive me, I just previously said in my meetings with the National Center is this Lifespan of Rochester, and they are the contractor for the National Institute of Justice for these grants. Next slide. Their goal is to support the development of new state and territorial and tribal coalitions to provide ongoing training, technical support, and act as a clearinghouse for resources and information concerning elder justice issues, programs, and advocacy. So when I say I learned about stalking at the National Center, this was one of their programs to educate us, to take this information back to our states or to our tribal communities and proliferate, right? To share. Many of the states have been working on this. There is one coalition, I believe, that has been around for 16 years. I had never even heard of elder justice, let alone that there was a coalition that had been in operation for 16 years. And so the National Center is acting as a clearinghouse for all of that information, including some of the formative stuff that coalitions do that to get started, things that they shouldn't do, things that are helpful to do, etc. One of the things that the National Center is also doing is, because these coalitions are statewide, if you are having difficulty or if they see there is a missing perspective in your coalition, they will help you connect using their resources with who in your state is doing that. Have you talked to this person? Have you met that person? And by way of an example, law enforcement is important in this process. And as I said earlier, all of these are multidisciplinary, and law enforcement is one of the disciplines. So it's important that we work together to make sure that all of the coalitions are tied in with the law enforcement system in their state. The National Center, working with the Department of Justice, is hosting us in a meeting in February, and the two law enforcement folks from each state I say that they were invited to participate, and I don't know how strong that invitation was, but there are two representatives of law enforcement at the statewide level that are coming, and part of our agenda is just to meet them and to tell them what we're doing and to talk about how we can work together in these efforts. that's an important step because one of the professional groups that we need to educate is law enforcement. Short story, I said that the National Center asked me, did we have stalking on our radar? To which I replied, no. And they shared a story of a woman who was an older woman who was being stalked, had reported to law enforcement. Law enforcement basically said, it's your imagination, you're just looking for attention. She was very, very organized and methodical. She kept copious notes of all of the things that the stalker did, including coming into her home, rummaging through her drawers, leaving her notes, etc. And one of the reasons that she could never get any traction is because law enforcement did not believe that a woman, and I believe she was some 75 years of age, they did not believe that a 75-year-old woman could be stalked. They just didn't think it was a thing. So basically, gaslit, ignored her until she came with such overwhelming evidence. And the stalker became more brazen. I believe at some point, not only he had come into her house and was rummaging through her drawers, but he got to the point where he was actually breaking into her house and leaving like notes on the table and just being much more brazen because nothing was happening. And it was only then that there was some action. That's a law enforcement education opportunity. That is a law enforcement education opportunity. Likewise with trafficking. People are sensitive to sexual trafficking, trafficking of young men and women, young, teenage, adolescent men and women, boys and girls, but they don't typically think of trafficking as something that would impact an older adult. And so they may see it and may miss it. Next slide. So the other coalitions in our cohort are California Elder Justice Coalition, Colorado, Maine, Rhode Island, Texas, and Wisconsin. And I will point out that one of the coalitions is actually a tribal coalition. They are fascinating. They are fascinating to hear their work because they have created an agreement with various Native tribes across the country in support of elder justice and working to eliminate, do awareness around abuse, many of the educational things, but it is not tied to a state. And so they have tribes in the Dakotas, they have tribes that are on the East Coast and in the Southeast. They have a network across the country, which is a very fascinating thing. Even coordinating just within the state of Missouri is hard. I can't imagine coordinating something across the country, but they are doing it. The woman who is running that particular coalition is a member of the Native community, of the Indigenous peoples community, and she's just a force of nature. She's just really awesome just to look at and listen to the things that they're doing and the work that's going on. Next slide. So, as I said, all initiatives are structured, all of these coalitions are structured as multidisciplinary coalition. And so a coalition is an alliance between groups of individuals for a common action or goal. And so all of them include people from mental health, people from law enforcement, from social services. We have some coalitions that are focused on financial exploitation, and so they have heavy representation of the financial community. There are a couple of coalitions that much of their focus has led them to work in the area of housing. Well, why housing? I think this might be a California thing, or I may have heard it from California, not that it's a California thing. But one of the outgrowths of abuse could be losing your home. Just think, if the person who is exploiting you or abusing you also happens to be the person that you live with, what do? There are some statistics that suggest that many of our long-term care facilities are becoming housing for older adults who are, in effect, homeless. And so housing becomes part of that elder justice system because people have to have a home. So the groups that become part of this alliance are varied and are somewhat state specific. There are lots of commonalities, as I said, law enforcement, mental health, physical health, uh, social services, those sort of things. But increasingly, we're seeing housing becomes a member of the alliance because people need housing, just as food and food providers become members of the alliance because food and food insecurity is unfortunately becoming a feature in the lives of many older adults and adults with disabilities. Next slide. So the goals of the National Center is to have an elder justice coalition representing, next slide, please, to create a standard practices and processes for coalitions. And so everybody is not starting over from scratch, and that they have some standard practices and processes. Next slide. To create a body of information and data. And I'm going to stop here for a second and speak a little bit more to that, because I was surprised that there was not a robust body of information and data about elder abuse and occurrences, etc. Now, I don't want to be confusing, because there is a lot of information out there, but a lot of the information is unclear, in that elder abuse is still underreported. And so some of it is based on, well, with this percentage of the population being older, this is what we would expect. And there's not a lot of hard data. Some of the reasons that elder abuse or areas are underreported is because sometimes people don't recognize that they've been abused. Sometimes it is law enforcement and their recognition and their reporting. And so the National Center wants to address that, to create a body of information of not only incidents of abuse, but also programmatically, what kind of things work and what sort of things are being tested, but we don't have data to say that this kind of a response is really effective. By way of example, there is some work being done on restorative justice. Again, I said justice is not, in the context that I'm using it, is not a legal term. It's not hinged to law enforcement. But many people really see the only way that justice can be levied is if somebody goes to jail, if somebody is punished. What restorative justice tends to look at is not if someone is punished or someone goes to jail or makes financial restitution, but that the person in the center of the abuse, the person who has been abused, is restored. And what does that mean? That could mean that their abuser gets help. They get mental health support that restores them. Or that they are able to live independently in a home that is free of emotional abuse. That's restorative for them. Restorative justice tends to look at not only the perpetrator of the abuse, but also the person who has been abused, and does not necessarily end in some sort of legal conviction or even a legal process. How effective it is, it's still being studied. There are some places around the country that are taking on a restorative justice frame for not only abuse, but things impacting seniors, older adults, and adults with disabilities, and seeing just how robust and studying whether or not this is really a positive approach. The National Center is involved in that and collecting that data. So at some point, if we want to look at a bolus of possible interventions and say, hey, tell me what my choices are and tell me what is effective, we will have that information. Next slide. So what I tend to think of this as is the work of the coalition builds on the works of its members, of other states and other initiatives, and also on the work of the National Center. And so when I said that I am not an expert, I'm building on the efforts of others. And what we're trying to build is a state, a circumstance that is better and much more just for our older citizens and our adult citizens with disabilities. Next slide. So one of the building blocks that we've done within the state is reframing the adult abuse system. This was a project that I am still working on with the host of partners that was funded by the Missouri Foundation for Help. And what it looks at is the system of agencies and organizations that respond once an older adult has been involved in an abusive situation. That could be law enforcement. Someone put in the chat earlier. That could be a call initiated by any of the mandated reporters. That could be long-term care facilities, that could be nurses, that could be social workers, most people with a license. But looking at how that system works and how well it works for the person who's been abused. We have learned a lot in this process. We're still learning. The funding for that runs through the middle of this year. We have been conducting summits. We have been interviewing survivors. We run stakeholder meetings where we talk to people who are part of the system and get their input on what the issues are, where the gaps are, and look to address those. A funny story with this reframing, we were having a stakeholder meeting someone was talking about a circumstance. Another member of the meeting said, well, why didn't you call me when this happened? And there was, I don't know, that pregnant 10-second pause while people are thinking. And she said, didn't know I should have. She says, oh, yes. And then the other person then started to rattle off the program support that they had for the circumstance that the other person described. They're part of the system, but they didn't know what each other did. They didn't know when to call each other and how one was also helpful in addressing the needs of the recipient. So much of what we're doing as part of the reframing is helping people understand what each part of the system does and how they work together, and introducing them to each other on some occasions, just letting them know each other exists. Another building block has been the Victimization Task Force, and that is a task force run out of the Missouri Developmental Disability Council. And those are folks and organizations that deal with the needs of the adult disabled community. And they also have developed some responses, some supports. And so we have learned from them, as well as other efforts that include things that we've learned from other states across the nation who, as I said earlier, are much farther along than we are in doing this work of elder justice in the community. Next slide. So other synergies, other places that we've learned is that we are working with, or I'm working with, the Master Plan on Aging. That's that MPOA. I just mentioned the Missouri Foundation for Health grant. All of the things that these groups are doing all take a statewide perspective. They focus on older adult Missourians and adult Missourians with disabilities. They gather information and gather input from a multidisciplinary stakeholder perspective. We are taking a system and a community approach, a community focus. The MFH grant is much more systemic. They look at the adult abuse system. The Coalition for Justice for Elder and Disabled Adults really takes much more of a community focus. So if one would think that the MFH grant identified some things that happened from a systemic level, how do we fix that, if you will, for the community? That would be CJEDA. We go from planning to action. The MFH grant, one of its outcomes is to come up with a strategic plan. The coalition is really all about action. It is not a planning grant. And all of our actions are informed by our stakeholders, our best practices, by research, and by child and family violence abuse wisdom. In some quarters, you will hear them say that elder justice or elder abuse is where child abuse was 20 years ago. Others will say that it is much akin to family violence and where family violence was 25 years ago. So next slide. So what I'm doing now, and I consider this part of this, is making connections, sharing information, and expanding the coalition. We have lots of educational programs that we have placed on the calendar, and some of them are done purely from the coalition standpoint. Others are done in collaboration, cooperation with some of our coalition partners. But our big thing right now is making connections and letting people know that we're out here and what we're doing. Next slide. So we're all working in support of older adults and adults with disabilities. My goal and the goal of this effort is to do it much more strategically, to do it much more collaboratively, and to do it much more efficiently. And I think I got this from my mother, but the line, and it's actually used on a commercial, that if you want to go someplace fast, you go by yourself. But if you want to go far, you go with a group. I come from older Southern parents who came to this part of the country in a group. In a group. They wanted to arrive safely, and they were coming very far from home. And so I think that the collaborative spirit was poured in me very young. And so working in support of older adults and adults with disabilities has to be collaborative because I want us to go far. Next slide, which will have my name and my phone number. And I invite people to contact me for more information, for resources, or even say, oh, I didn't understand a word that you said and what you were talking about. Can you explain it to me? Or if you have questions or want to chat, I certainly invite you to call me. Questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you, Janice. Does anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat or raise your Zoom hand or come off mute, and we have a couple minutes for some questions. While people are thinking, I'll start with mine. Do you have any, I know you're just beginning. Are there any seminars or workshops or events that you can tell us about that are on the books yet?
There are, unfortunately, I didn't bring the dates with me, but there actually are. There are some things that, let me back up. There are a couple of things that are planned. I don't have the dates with me, and the dates have not been settled. But if I may, I will share those with Natalie as we put them on. We also are planning 2 summits, if you will, which will be educational. They will be free, and it will be an opportunity for people to meet each other and also get some information. There is a very strong possibility that one of the speakers will be someone from either the National Institute of Justice or from the National Center. So dates, or we're coordinating with other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also, the other question I had, Janice, is how does Missouri stack up to other states? I know that the information that you have, you say, isn't good or comparative, but do you have any sense of how we do in terms of our system working or our prevention strategies or our long-term care initiatives, et cetera?
Yes, I have a sense. When I was writing the grant and when I was looking at things, what I ended up doing is taking national statistics and applying them to Missouri because we didn't have good Missouri data. So when I say, how do we stack up? It's kind of a question mark because there isn't a lot of data. What I have learned since then is that there are pockets of data, but they are not gathered regularly, and they are not published. And so to answer your question of how Missouri stacks up, we really can't answer it because we don't have the data to say that for a community, for a state this size with this percentage of older citizens, this is where we should be. We just don't have the data to support that. What I would say is some of the things from the US Census, that Missouri has a larger than average percentage of older adults. That is, Missouri is an older state. And so to me, that makes it even more important that we have a robust system for our older adults, because Missouri is a larger percentage of older adults. I've also learned that rural Missouri has a disproportionate share of older adults. And yet, in many quarters of rural Missouri, there are no services or limited services. And so, to answer your question, how does Missouri stack up? I can't say in comparison to the rest of the state, but I can say these are just little nuggets that I've learned as we have been doing this work.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Janice?
Donna,
Do you see any, Natalie? Oh, you have some here? Oh, there are messages in chat. I'm sorry, I was not paying attention.
Yes.
Thank you for this work.
There are a couple of, just by way of differences, and thank you, Donna, back for this comment. There are a couple of coalitions that have been around for a while that have a strong university affiliation. As a matter of fact, one of the programs that the National Center sponsored was in collaboration with the university, and it was awesome. Was awesome. And so that's one of the things that we hope to do. Missouri, one of the reasons that the National Center was interested, and I think looked kindly on our proposal, is because Missouri really hasn't been engaged in this work as actively as some others, and doesn't have the connections, the university, I would even say healthcare connections, that other states have.
Thank you, Janice. And Donna, Kakada?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Janice, for the wonderful presentation. I learned a ton about the laws, the policy around elder abuse in Missouri, also in the U.S. So I'm sorry if my question already been answered in your presentation, but it's about older adult who got sponsored and came to the U.S. Through immigration, right? So those older adults, they are very linguistically limited. Also, in terms of culture, for instance, I'm from Cambodia. When it comes to financial abuse, we don't see that because older adults tend to give money to their kids. And sometimes they do it out of, cultural norm or some type of something that they've been trained to do culturally, traditionally, right? But over the course of their life here in the U.S., things change, and somehow they might need that money for themselves. But the son or the kid or the grandkids, they might not need that money, right? So we can't really distinguish that. That's first of all part of my first question. And when it comes to language, like I said earlier, they're very limited. They can't talk freely, right? So I'm not sure I see that in your presentation regarding, and you see in St. Louis in general, like if you go to South County, there's a lot of folks from Bosnia, from Poland, and if you go to West County, a lot of folks from a lot of Vietnamese, older adult, tons of them I've seen. And they speak little to no English, and they might not be able to report that, or they might not know if that is really defined legally as financial abuse, right? So is there any policy or training in place to spot that among linguistically marginalized groups in the U.S., especially young immigrants?
Thanks, Kakada.
Thank you.
It's very interesting that you asked that question, because Nancy asked, things that we had on tap. That is one of the programs that we're putting together. That is not an area of my expertise, but there are people at the National Center that is their expertise, and we're working with them for that very reason. That the belief is that in non-English as a primary language speaking adults, that abuse is even more underreported. And so we are looking to put together some programming in partnership with our Hope is the International Institute and some others to get the word out. Because I think you're right. People may not even recognize it as being abusive. So yes, it is on our menu. I am leaning very heavily on the National Center in that regard because that is not an area of my expertise.
Thanks, Kakana. Really important.
Yeah, great question.
Well, it looks like, Janice, people know how to contact you with more questions or to get involved. We'll certainly be interested in how this develops over the next few years and hope you'll come back and give us a progress report when you get further down the line. It's very important work. Thank you so much. And I hope that we see you all next month at our Issues in Aging when Dr. Peggy Smith will be talking to us about policies and programs to support caregivers.
Awesome. Thank
you very much, everyone.